8. The Tirpitz. Built by Nazi Germany in the late 1930s, the Tirpitz was one of 2 Kriegsmarine Bismarck-class armored battleships during World War II. Outweighing its sister ship, the Bismarck, by 2,000 tons, it was the heaviest European naval battleship in its history. The Tirpitz was a formidable force, one which British Prime Minister Winston Churchill wanted to squash as soon as possible. He saw it as a major threat to Allied shipping routes, particularly those heading to the Soviet Union with desperately needed supplies and reinforcements. The British Royal Navy poured significant resources into maintaining a substantial presence capable of containing the battleship if necessary, which was certainly a wise move. But in the 1942 wake of the Allied raid on the German Saint-Nazaire submarine base in France, the Nazis deemed it too risky to attempt any counterattacks against Atlantic shipping lanes. The ship spent most of its short-lived career stationed in waters off German-occupied Norway, where its role was to stop an Allied invasion. In 1942, it participated in 2 attempts to intercept Allied shipping convoys in the Arctic Sea region. Throughout the following year, the Tirpitz fought against enemy positions in Norway. It received significant damage in late 1943 from sustained air raids, but continued serving in the area for another year. In late 1944, British bombers dropped 3 massive 12,000-pound bombs on the Tirpitz. It started to capsize rapidly, while a deck fire spread to one of its ammunition magazines, causing a major explosion. Somewhere between 950 and 1,200 German sailors died that day in the disaster, and the wreck was later broken up after the war. 7. Missing Mark I tank blueprints. The first tank ever used in actual combat was the British-made Mark I. It was designed in 1915 to help break the stalemate of World War I trench warfare by allowing Allied troops along the Western Front to traverse through craters and ram straight through barbed wire. The Mark I played an integral role in winning the war and changed the very nature of modern warfare as a whole. It made its first appearance in 1916 at the Battle of the Somme. Legend says that when an enemy soldier saw the tank approaching for the first time, they shouted, "The devil is coming." The only surviving Mark I is found at the Tank Museum in Dorset. For years, its blueprint was missing, leaving many elements of its design a mystery to modern engineers. The 2 places where the blueprint would most likely be, the Tank Museum and Britain's Imperial War Museum, didn't have it, leading to the belief that it was most likely lost forever at some point in the conflict. In 2018, famous engineer and TV host Guy Martin tried to build a Mark I replica based on what was known about the tank. Dubbed the Deborah II, it took 5 months to build and had a top speed of only 4 miles per hour. Needless to say, it wasn't a huge success. The blueprint was miraculously rediscovered in 2021 by a private owner whose family had been in possession of it for over a century. Thanks to financial support from former Royal Tank Regiment officer Tim Allen, the Tank Museum bought the blueprint at auction for £14,600. This part of history is now in the hands of capable historians. 6. Horten Ho 229. The German-made Horten Ho 229 was a prototype fighter aircraft designed during the later half of World War II. As the first tailless aircraft, or flying wing, powered by jet engines, it was essentially a forerunner to today's stealth bombers. The Ho 229 was developed in response to a call for a light bomber capable of carrying 2,200 pounds of bombs over a long 620-mile distance. At the time, jet propulsion was still in its infant stages, and jet engines consumed a high amount of fuel. The aircraft's designers saw the flying wing configuration as a way to maximize aerodynamic efficiency, and to minimize its drag, they avoided adding any features that weren't absolutely necessary for function. Several prototypes of the Ho 229 were created, and over 100 of the fighters were pre-ordered in anticipation of its mass production. The first prototype was an unpowered glider. The second was successful, capable of flying at altitudes up to 49,000 feet in the air and reaching speeds of 600 miles per hour, falling just 20 miles per hour short of its intended speed. It completed 2 successful test flights, but met engine trouble during the third and crashed. V2 was completely destroyed, and its pilot died a few weeks later from his injuries. The third prototype, V3, was still being built when US forces seized it in an intelligence-gathering mission called Operation Paperclip. There were two other prototypes in the early stages of being built, but the military took the V3 because it was closest to completion. British and American researchers analyzed the aircraft before it was put into long-term storage, where it remained until its restoration in 2011. Although incomplete, it's the only surviving example of the Ho 229, which influenced the design of many iconic American stealth fighters like the B-2 and the F-117. It's now on permanent display at the Smithsonian's Udvar-Hazy Center in Chantilly, Virginia. 5. HMS Dreadnought. Built in 1905 and 1906 for the British Royal Navy, the HMS Dreadnought revolutionized battleship technology and set the precedent for the future generations of battleships. The appropriately named vessel, whose name translates to "fear nothing" in Old English, was created to be well-armored, well-armed, and fast. Until then, most naval ships were either built to withstand heavy fire but slow, or fast with not much protection. The Dreadnought boasted more than twice the firepower of the usual battleship of its time. With state-of-the-art fire control, telescopic sighting technology, and more, it put all other battleships to shame. It was the first vessel of its kind to have a uniform main battery, instead of a few large guns supplemented by some smaller weapons. It was also capable of taking a significant beating. The ship was equipped with 5 12-inch twin-turret guns that each had a range of 14.2 miles, as well as 24 12-pounder or 76mm guns, each with a range of 5.3 miles. But it wasn't just the weapons themselves that made Dreadnought superior. It was the advanced electronic range transmitting equipment and state-of-the-art systems which made the use of the weapons incredibly accurate and efficient. Despite its capabilities, the Dreadnought didn't see much action. It wasn't able to participate in any of the war's naval battles, which limited its wartime accomplishments to the sinking of German U-boat SMU-29 in 1915. The ship was sold off to a private buyer in 1920 and was scrapped the next year. Although the Dreadnought experienced a fairly uneventful career, it went down in history for rendering all battleships before it obsolete and for sparking a global naval race, which peaked between 1909 and 1912 before the First World War. By 1920, almost 120 Dreadnought-type ships had been built around the world. To this day, steel battleships from before the Dreadnought's era are still referred to as pre-Dreadnoughts. 4. Ryan FR-1 Fireball. Designed for the US Navy during World War II, the Ryan FR Fireball was powered by both piston and jet engines. Its manufacturer, Ryan Aeronautical, made an agreement with the military to develop 3 FR-1 prototypes back in 1943. The FR-1 prototype was the Navy's first jet aircraft. Its designers used a mixed-power engine system because jet engines in that time had slow acceleration, which was considered unsafe and inappropriate for use on aircraft carriers. There were 4 M2 Browning machine guns mounted on the center of the jet's wings, and the aircraft was also capable of carrying 4 5-inch rockets under each outer wing panel. The prototype flew for the first time in 1944, but quickly ran into problems. All 3 test crafts were lost due to wing failure. The plane's designers solved the problem later on by doubling the number of rivets on the wings, and the Navy put in an order for 700 aircraft. But by the time the FR-1 rolled off the production line, World War I was practically over. Only 66 were made, and they never even saw combat. It was only assigned to one squadron, where it was in the company of superior aircraft powered by jet engines alone instead of a mixed-engine system. The FR-1 was withdrawn from service in 1947 and was essentially forgotten altogether after its brief career. Almost all 66 examples were scrapped, with just a few being saved for modifications and testing purposes. Today, the only survivor is housed at the Planes of Fame Air Museum in Chino, California. While the Fireball came and went without much fanfare, it still made its mark in military aviation history. After all, it was the Navy's first jet aircraft. 3. Cultivator Number 6. At the beginning of World War II, the British Royal Navy designed a massive trench-digging machine codenamed the White Rabbit Number 6. It went by a few other names, including NLE Tractors, the Mole, and Cultivator Number 6. Lightly armored and equipped with barely any weapons, the unconventional vehicle was meant to dig a trench as it advanced upon an enemy position. It was the brainchild of Winston Churchill, who feared an all-out war at a time when international conflict was the last thing a lot of Europeans wanted. Acting on lessons learned from World War I, he believed the machine would be capable of effortlessly crossing through no man's land in the dark to break a stalemate in trench warfare. At his suggestion, the War Department reluctantly went along with the idea and approved the construction of a fleet of cultivators. Measuring 77 feet long and weighing 130 tons, the prototype trench cutter, nicknamed Nellie, was an incredibly large machine. Based on what Churchill required, the vehicle's designers outfitted the prototype with a plow-like device capable of removing the top portion of a trench. From there, a rotating cutting attachment would dig the bottom half. The soil would be placed beside the trench, and the wings on the machine's plow blade would keep it from falling back inside. Cultivator Number 6 was one of the heaviest and largest military vehicles during its time, and it served its purpose well. Sadly, there was no practical use for it, and although it was still under development when it was realized the next conflict would not be a trench war, Churchill failed to call the project off when he should have. 5 of the vehicles were produced before he finally gave in and brought the construction to end. All of the known examples were scrapped in the 1950s. 2. Shokaku Aircraft Carrier. The Shokaku was an Imperial Japanese Navy aircraft carrier built in the late 1930s. Construction of the 845-foot-long vessel was carried out in secret to avoid the prying eyes of other curious countries. By the time it was finished, the Shokaku was the Imperial Navy's most advanced carrier and one of the top vessels of its kind in the whole world. Manned by a crew of 1,660 sailors, it was equipped with 3 elevators that moved planes from the hangar decks up to the main deck quickly. The ship was also known for its comfortable living quarters, which were designed to keep the crew's morale high. The Shokaku participated in several key naval battles in the Pacific, including the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Battle of the Coral Sea, and the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands. During the Battle of the Philippine Sea in 1944, the ship was hit repeatedly by American torpedoes. The captain then gave the order to abandon ship, but it sank too quickly for most men to escape in time, taking 1,272 sailors with it to the seafloor. 1. Sikorsky JRS-1. Nicknamed the Flying Pickup Truck for its bulky exterior, the Sikorsky JRS-1 amphibious plane was used by the US Navy during the 1940s for a few different non-combat activities, including taking aerial photographs and delivering mail to troops stationed in the Hawaiian Islands. Measuring 51 feet long, it was the military's version of the Sikorsky S-43 Baby Clipper. Only 20 were ever made, and 10 were stationed at Pearl Harbor when the Japanese attacked on December 7, 1941. Only 1 JRS survived that day, and it remains the only example of the aircraft today. It's housed at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., and is extremely weathered from years of outside storage damage. The museum plans to one day restore the plane. There's also another known surviving example of the S-43, known as N440. It was once owned by the famed eccentric aviator Howard Hughes. It now belongs to an aviation enthusiast named Kermit Meeks, and according to the most recent update, is at the Fantasy of Flight Museum in Polk City, Florida, awaiting its own restoration. 4. Next Generation Attack Submarine. By the mid-2030s, the US Navy hopes to start acquiring the Next Generation Attack Submarine, a new class of nuclear-powered attack submarine which is also known as SSNX. Since 1998, they've been obtaining the Virginia-class SSN design. The SSNX will be the successor if the US Navy follows through with this procurement. Their projected budget in 2023 for SSNX research and development funding is $237 million. The US Navy uses nuclear-powered cruise missile submarines, assault submarines, and ballistic missile submarines. They're all-purpose with a wide range of duties that they can carry out in peacetime and combat. The X in SSNX means that the boat's exact design has not yet been decided. The Navy claims the SSNX will offer greater speed, increased horizontal payload capacity, higher operational availability, and improved acoustic superiority once completed. It'll be used to confront the rising danger presented by rivalry between both peers and adversaries for underwater domination. Additionally, it'll be able to communicate with a large number of off-hull vehicles, allied troops, and sensors. It will enhance multi-mission capabilities, maintain a fighting presence in restricted seas, and carry out full-blown underwater warfare. The original Virginia-class design, and potentially even the original Seawolf SSN-21 design, will likely be surpassed by the SSNX. The designs of US Navy submarines with similar cargoes have often increased in displacement from one generation to the next, thanks to technical advancements throughout time. According to the Navy's budget documents, SSNX should have strong networking capabilities, including the capacity to exchange data with a number of different platforms, some of which could be unmanned undersea and surface ships. The service has already made great strides in networking and sensor fusion technologies, with the goal of eventually being able to connect all of its ships, submarines, planes, and other assets. The cost of the Navy actually building a fleet of SSNX submarines is still a significant cause of concern for many. The military's decision to buy fewer Seawolves than originally planned was taken in large part because of how expensive they are. The final selling prices for Connecticut and Seawolf were about $6 billion, and that was 4 years ago. Today, they're well over that. Together with the somewhat more expensive Jimmy Carter, these attack submarines are the most expensive ever built. What do you think about this developing technology? Do you think it's worth the cost? Let us know down in the comments and be sure to subscribe. 3. Robotic combat vehicles. After years of testing, the US Army is getting ready to deploy a family of uncrewed combat vehicles in order to increase the firepower of infantry and armored brigade combat teams. They will be used not only to shoot at the enemy, but to lay smokescreens in front of friendly troops, jam unfriendly communications, and other similar dangerous tasks. It saves soldiers from being put in harm's way. The robotic combat vehicles, or robot tanks, will be operated mainly by the Army and will come in 3 different size classes. Each one will serve on a separate level of lethality and will range from light, medium, and heavy. With a maximum length of 18 feet, the smallest of the RCVs will weigh less than 10 tons. It'll be known as the RBC Light and be equipped with a Javelin anti-tank missile launcher. Its weapon is light but extremely potent. Helicopter transportation for RCVL is also intended. The Army anticipates losing RCVL during battle since they are attritable. The middle sibling of the 3 is called RCV Medium, RCVM. Due to its somewhat greater length and width compared to the RCVM, the RCVM will be flown in a C-130J Super Hercules. To contain armor, more powerful guns, and a track-laying system similar to tanks, it weighs close to 20 tons. Unlike the RCVL, the Army doesn't expect or want to lose the RCVM in combat at all. They're bigger, a lot more expensive, and much more sophisticated. It'll come with 30 to 40 millimeter medium cannons or multiple anti-tank guided missiles for added protection. Lastly, the main battle tank will have no crew whatsoever. The robotic combat vehicle heavy RCVH is significantly heavier than the other 2. It'll be so big that a C-17 Globemaster III long-range transport can only hold 2 of them. The Army refers to the RCVH as a non-expendable system, and it's also the most expensive of them all. With its large caliber direct fire gun, RCVH will be able to defeat threat tanks like the Russian T-14 Armata main battle tanks and the Chinese Type 99, as well as all Tier 1 threats. Ground-based vehicles must take a precise path around difficult terrain in advance or push through, whereas air and sea-based vehicles can fly or glide past obstructions. Ground vehicles must also navigate a variety of different kinds of terrain, including rivers, steep hillsides, dense woods, and desert sands. Soldiers want the robots to perform a number of tasks, not all of which require weapons. In any case, the RCVs will be armed. According to feedback from actual soldiers, the RCVs should be able to build smokescreens, fire down drones, handle radiological, biological, chemical, and nuclear threats, find minefields, and even label them. 2. The Army's Big Ten and AI of the future. The Bradley infantry vehicle, the Abrams tank, the Apache attack helicopter, the Black Hawk helicopter, and the Patriot missile made up what the US Army calls the Big Five, which first became popularized in the 1980s. In many ways, all five have endured the test of time, and it's reasonable to say that they defined an era in modern warfare. Each of these platforms has undergone many changes. From the way they were when they first debuted to what they are now, with new guns, sensors, networking, and computer systems, they're almost completely new machines. According to the Army, only so many upgrades can be added to the Big Five, and there are limits to what can be done to the legacy system regardless of how much success it has. In order to create new platforms, which they refer to as the Big Ten, the Army is currently fully involved in a grand operation. To put it simply, a brand new age of warfare is peeking up over the horizon. Electronic warfare, hypersonic weapons that can go through space, precision weapons, data processing powered by artificial intelligence, and borderless, untraceable cyber attacks have and continue to transform modern combat in ways we never imagined. As a result, the Pentagon is currently engaged in a substantial modernization program, involving initiatives to identify the greatest and most significant advancements in combat. It is anticipated that future wars will require a much different approach than conflicts of the past. Army futurists envision the future of modern warfare as being a lot more information-driven, AI-enabled, drone-heavy, and more dispersed or disaggregated. A multi-domain warfare environment to encompass more recently advancing domains like outer space and cyberspace is expected by the Army, above everything else. The platforms that will be included in the Big Ten are the Robotic Combat Vehicle, Optionally Manned Fighting Vehicle, Long-Range Hypersonic Weapon, Precision Strike Missile, Expanded Range Cannon Artillery, Future Tactical Unmanned Aerial System, Attack Reconnaissance Aircraft, Future Long-Range Assault, Network, and, of course, Artificial Intelligence. In essence, AI and networks are interconnected with everything and provide the frameworks for contemporary ideas of combined arms. These platforms will all be networked, and they're all going to have cutting-edge computer algorithms to account for new sensors, guidance technology, firing control, cyber resilience, manned-unmanned teaming, new weapons, and much more. Warfare has changed in quality over time thanks to human evolution, technological improvements, and overall human progress. AI is transforming warfare by giving weapons their own autonomy. In this perspective, perception, cognition, and action are the three big components. The outcome is the third, whereas perception and cognition are a series of instructions and algorithms. A weapon system that's able to function autonomously means that it doesn't need supervision or approval in order to perform its functions. The military's use of artificial intelligence focuses on cyber-attacking software, autonomous vehicles, and data crunching. Autonomy ranges in degrees, from low to high. Landmines would be considered low-level weapons, as opposed to fire-and-forget missiles, which are semi-autonomous weapons. The Israeli Army and the United States Navy both possess weaponry that's capable of independently detecting, tracking, and firing at incoming missiles using pre-programmed tech. This acts as a good example of a weapon with a high level of autonomy. Unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, also have navigational autonomy. The coordinates entered into them determine how they behave. Everything else about their actions is programmed. The current generation of military systems will be significantly more autonomous thanks to advanced artificial intelligence and the ability of machines to learn. Take killer robots as an example. They'll be able to roam about freely, recognize targets all on their own, and decide whether to shoot and kill the target. They won't need help from humans and will be able to carry out complicated tasks by themselves. They'll also engage in combat on battlefields in future wars, either with human soldiers or in place of them. It's thought to be a lot safer than other forms of warfare. Critics argue that computer programs can misfire and cause casualties with friendly fire. It could be claimed that AI will undoubtedly defeat humans in any future war as a result of its superior advancement. In 2020, in 5 provoked dogfights against a US Air Force F-16 pilot, an AI program prevailed each and every time. Australian Air Force researchers and Boeing have developed an autonomous aircraft called the Loyal Wingman to support and protect their air warriors. In the world of automated vehicles, this airplane is seen as a game changer. Artificial intelligence is built into it, and it's supposed to fly alongside manned combat aircraft, offering increased levels of observation, defense, and assistance in downing aircraft. It's expected to start operating somewhere between 2024 and 2025. Global competition is pressuring decision makers and military organizations to increase the use of AI in military operations. The 3 countries that matter most in this respect are the United States, the People's Republic of China, and Russia. In some parts of the US, research is being done on autonomous boats that are able to locate and track submarines halfway around the world. Similar to how Russia is developing underwater drones, China is investigating swarm intelligence capabilities. A mixture of hopefulness and anguish is felt among the leaders of states and tech giants in regard to the use of AI. The future of AI for everyone, not just Russia, comes with massive opportunities, but it may also come with just as many unpredictable dangers. Whoever leads the way in the AI realm will be the ruler of the world, according to Vladimir Putin, Russia's president. In this ever-changing world, a new arms race has already started with the development of AI. We're currently in the 3rd revolution of warfare, and the creation and growth of killer robots have been regarded as seismic. It's comparable to when nuclear weapons and gunpowder were first discovered. The burden on people would be reduced, since AI would be better at detecting threats. It would support active strategy development free from ego, emotions, and selfishness. Using unmanned systems in conjunction with networking is a key driving force behind next-generation combined arms. Drones, AI-powered weapons and sensors, air-ground-sea integration, and new space combat dynamics will all play a significant role in the future of war. By 2040, military decision-making generated from AI is projected to include available space-based data in real time. 1. F-15EX fighter jets. The first of Boeing's brand new 4th generation plus F-15EX fighters will be purchased by none other than the Pentagon. The new acquisition will cost the government about $1.1 billion for just 8 of the new jets, with additional purchases set to follow in the next few years. The Air Force's decision to buy an improved model of an older fighter instead of a more recent stealth plane like the F-35 has raised quite a bit of controversy. Even learning that it would be receiving the F-15EX, much less 144 of them, astonished the Air Force. Over time, the beloved F-15C/D will be replaced by the F-15EX and later retired. Despite the F-15's mid-1970s debut, modern versions are more sophisticated than the ones originally delivered to the USAF in 1974. The Eagles of today are more advanced than any the Air Force flies, with stronger airframes, more efficient computers, and extensive flight control systems. An upgraded radar and other components that Eagles from other countries lack are new to the F-15EX. The new aircraft would have an electronic warfare and threat detection system called the Eagle Passive Active Warning Survivability System, EPAWS, as well as a more powerful mission computer, new cockpit displays, and a digital backbone. There's a solid reason why foreign air forces still use the F-15s, even in countries lacking America's advanced technology. They've never lost a battle. The older aircraft is meant to support, not replace the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, so upgrading F-15s won't alter operational strategy either. In order to locate and engage targets, the F-35 enters enemy airspace using its advanced stealth and sensor equipment. To keep their radar stealth, F-35s have interior bays where they store their armaments. Contrarily, each F-15EX can transport about 30,000 pounds of air-to-air and air-to-ground weaponry. According to F-35 maker Lockheed Martin, the maximum takeoff weight is 5,700 pounds. The F-35 was nicknamed a battlefield quarterback by the US Air Force. The F-35 and F-15 will work together as a team. As soon as the F-35 spots the enemy coming, the F-15 will already be well on its way to take them down. 4. The Gustav Gun. In order to invade France and advance into the rest of Western Europe, Adolf Hitler needed to get past a 280-mile line of concrete fortifications called the Maginot Line, which ran along the French border with Italy, Switzerland, Luxembourg, and Belgium. It was built in order to force the Nazis to go around the line and through the incredibly dense Ardennes forest, which the French believed was impossible. At first, the Germans didn't consider going around the Maginot Line to be a viable option either, so they set their sights on figuring out how to cross through it without suffering enormous casualties. One idea that Hitler came up with was to create a railway gun that was powerful enough to pierce the fortifications. By the time this vision came to fruition in 1941 as the Gustav Gun, France had already fallen due to the development of powerful tanks that were capable of barreling through the Ardennes forest. But the Nazis saw other good uses for the weapon, so development continued. Measuring 4 stories high and 155 feet long, the Gustav Gun was the largest calibered rifled weapon ever used in combat. Also called the Schwere Gustav or the Heavy Gustav, it weighed 1,350 tons and had a 100-foot-long barrel that measured 31 inches in diameter. The Germans developed the weapon based on the philosophy of the bigger, the better, which had dominated military technology around the world for centuries. More specifically, it came following decades of increasingly large railroad guns among the planet's superpowers. Its design was largely inspired by a German-built long-range artillery piece that was created during World War I called the Paris Gun, which struck the famed French capital with 243-pound shells from 75 miles away. The Gustav Gun was first used in the 1942 Siege of Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula, where the Germans fought the Soviet Union for control of the Sevastopol port along the Black Sea. During the battle, the Gustav Gun fired 300 shells. While it was capable of causing great damage, the gun came with numerous disadvantages because of its size. It was an easy target for Allied overhead bombers and could only be moved along a specialized railroad that had to be built in advance. The Gustav Gun took 4 days to assemble, hours to calibrate, and required hundreds of men to operate it, and it could only fire a maximum of 14 shells per day. Technology advanced rapidly throughout the conflict, and by the time the colossal weapon was developed, railroad guns were quickly becoming obsolete. Only 2 Gustav guns were ever made, and the Nazis stopped using them a year after the first one was produced, and eventually they were scrapped entirely. 3. Electromagnetic railguns. In 2005, the US Navy began working to develop a futuristic weapon called the Electromagnetic Railgun, or EMRG, which uses no gunpowder, but instead relies on electromagnetism to fire its projectiles. Unlike most conventional large guns, which often require a full team to operate, an EMRG only needs 1 operator. The technology is surprisingly basic. Simply put, powerful electrical currents generate magnetic fields, which accelerate the projectile along 2 rails. The Navy spent more than 15 years and $500 million working to develop its railgun, which is capable of striking targets 124 miles away at speeds of up to 1.6 miles per second. It was at least 3 times as fast as existing weapons, and while each projectile came with a $25,000 price tag, it was much cheaper than a missile round of the closest comparable capabilities. It would seem crazy not to jump all over the opportunity to have a weapon that's cheaper and easier to use. The EMRG was also proven not to jam and had a greater range than conventional guns. However, there are some issues with the electromagnetic railgun that have prevented it from becoming a standard issue fixture of any and all US naval warships. The main problem is that the amount of power the weapon requires is greater than most modern warships can provide. For years, there were rumors of the Navy abandoning the project, but military officials denied this and continued to hype up the program until 2021. This was when the Navy pulled the plug on its funding for the railgun as well as the 3-foot-long projectile that was being developed for the weapon. By then, China had also started designing its own electromagnetic railgun. And while the US began to see a lack of usefulness for the weapon, China took the idea and ran with it, and has since claimed to develop the world's most advanced EMRG. According to a US intelligence report, the country plans to equip its naval ships with electromagnetic railguns as early as 2025. In 2020, CNBC reported that China's EMRG is supposedly capable of striking targets 124 miles away at a speed of up to 1.6 miles per second, which would put it on par with the capabilities of the American version of the weapon. At that speed, a projectile could travel from New York City to Philadelphia in less than a minute. China's electromagnetic railgun has reportedly reached the sea trial stage, meaning it surpassed the American project, which was ditched during the research and development phase. The US Navy has now turned its focus to hypersonic missiles, amid growing pressure to keep up with similar weapons that are being developed by China and Russia. In early 2022, the Navy announced that it had fired a hypersonic prototype round at White Sands missile range, which supposedly reached Mach 5 speeds. Several months later, the US Air Force launched its first hypersonic missile prototype off the southern coast of California. Development is slated to continue for the foreseeable future as the US works to outcompete the abilities of its adversaries. Do you think there should be a worldwide ban on developing atomic weapons? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. 2. M65 Atomic Cannon. In the years following World War II, the US and the Soviet Union engaged in a frenzied competition to outdo one another in terms of scientific achievements and military capabilities. These rivalries started as early as 1947, marking the beginning of the Cold War. One of the earliest American developments in the race for superiority was the M65 Atomic Cannon. The just over 85-ton, 85-foot-long weapon was produced in the early 1950s as a way to launch nuclear projectiles before missiles and rockets were available. At the time, it was the US Army's largest artillery weapon. Nicknamed Atomic Annie, the gun successfully test-fired a nuclear artillery shell at a range of 7 miles in 1953. Based on the results, the military moved ahead with the development of the M65 Atomic Cannon. However, the test would turn out to be the first and only time a nuclear shell was fired from a cannon. The M65 could be set up in as little as 12 minutes, and its transport vehicles could safely carry it at speeds of up to 35 miles per hour. At around 600 pounds, the weapon's 280mm shell was small for a nuclear weapon. But it was majorly destructive, as the test firing proved when it yielded a 15-kiloton explosion. Firing the M65 required a team of 5 to 7 operators, and the gun was capable of firing 2 to 3 rounds per hour. It had an effective firing range of approximately 20 miles and a muzzle velocity of 2,500 feet per second. 20 of the guns were produced at a cost of $800,000 each. The military deployed them to Korea and parts of Europe, and they were frequently moved in order to avoid being discovered and targeted by enemies. However, the M65 quickly became obsolete for several reasons. It was large, it had a limited range, and it required the development of nuclear shells that were compatible with existing artillery pieces. The US was quick to ditch the idea for the development of more mobile rockets, but it kept M65s in service as a prestige weapon until 1963, when they were replaced by tactical nuclear missiles. While its glory days were short-lived, some modern experts have argued that the M65 influenced the 1953 armistice that brought about a ceasefire to the Korean War. Throughout the Cold War, the Soviets also developed a handful of nuclear artillery pieces, including their own atomic howitzers and mortars. The largest Soviet nuclear artillery weapon was the Tu-A3 Condensator 2B, which was designed in the mid-1950s as a response to the M65. Measuring nearly 66 feet long and weighing 64 tons, the condensator was smaller than the M65, and it required a crew of 8 to operate. Each projectile weighed over 1,200 pounds and had a range of roughly 16 miles, which means that the ammunition was much larger than the M65's rounds, but they couldn't travel as far. There were several issues with the condensator. It was difficult to move due to its size, and it was too big to travel through most cities. The weapon was also complex, and it became obsolete by the time it was implemented, and it's been described by some as a failure. Only 4 condensators were ever produced, and their service life was extremely short, lasting from 1956 to the mid-1960s. In the end, the USSR and the United States both agreed to disarm any remaining nuclear artillery shortly before the Iron Curtain collapsed. At least 7 M65s survive today and are on display in various places throughout the US, including the US Army Artillery Museum at Fort Sill in Oklahoma and the US Army Ordnance Training and Heritage Center in Petersburg, Virginia. 1. Type 94 Naval Gun. In 1934, Japan withdrew from the League of Nations and the Washington Naval Treaty, a post-World War I agreement that sought to prevent an arms race by limiting naval construction. The treaty restricted the size and power of naval ships, but imposed no rules on how many vessels a navy could have. Although World War II was still several years away, tensions between Japan and the United States were already brewing due to the increasing American military presence in the South Pacific. An armed conflict was looming, and Japan wanted to be prepared. They knew they couldn't compete with the number of battleships the US Navy had at its disposal, but they were now free from the limits of the Washington Naval Treaty. And so, they set their sights on building massive ships that would be capable of engaging multiple enemy battleships at once. The 862-foot-long Yamato and its sister ship of similar size, the Musashi, were built in complete secrecy despite their gargantuan size. Construction began in 1937 and both ships were launched in 1940. The Yamato was commissioned in 1941 in Hiroshima Bay, just a week after the brutal attack on Pearl Harbor. This was carried out in a deliberately subdued and inconspicuous manner to avoid tipping off the Allies about the ship. As the biggest battleship ever built, the Yamato was at least 30% larger than any of its enemy ships in terms of displacement. But size alone would do little to advance Japan's war agenda, and a big ship would have served little purpose without big guns to go along with it, so the Japanese planned accordingly. Both the Yamato and the Musashi were equipped with the largest gun ever fitted to a naval ship, known as the Type 94 Naval Gun. Each weapon was over 69 feet in length and weighed over 162 tons. These guns were also capable of firing explosive and armor-piercing shells up to 26 miles. The guns were mounted in 3 gun turrets, with each ship equipped with 9 Type 94 guns. Each individual mounted turret weighed 2,510 tons, roughly the equivalent of an average-sized destroyer at the time. In addition to its sheer firepower, the Type 94 had another advantage. Unlike other large naval guns of the era, it was capable of firing special anti-aircraft shells called sanshiki, otherwise known as beehive rounds. They contained shrapnel and explosive materials, and were designed to create a barrage of fire that would make it difficult for attacking aircraft to navigate and see through. American pilots, however, regarded the ammunition as little more than a pyrotechnics display, and certainly didn't consider it to be an effective anti-aircraft weapon. But it still couldn't have been pleasant to be targeted with a 3,000-pound exploding shell, which typically burned for 5 seconds while spewing 16-foot-long flames. Out of the 27 Type 94 guns that were made, only 18 were ever used. And while the Yamato and Musashi served in the war, neither vessel was involved in any battleship-to-battleship engagements. And, in the end, both vessels were sunk by Allied forces, proving that having the biggest and best guns is no guarantee of victory. Which of these super weapons did you find the most fascinating? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.